As the next step in sort of bootstrapping our stack that we'll be working with, I would like to adopt React. React is a fantastic JavaScript framework for building dynamic user interfaces. It has a huge mindshare in the wider developer community. And here's a fun fact. I started on this version of the course not using React, but then as I got further in, I ended up sort of rolling my own state management mini framework that no one knows about that was kind of similar to React called D3 Rosetta. But based on some early feedback I got, people were like, bro, don't bother. Just use React. So I'm like, okay, fine. I think you're right. I think that makes sense. So here we go. Let's use React. Before I go any further, though, I just want to say that I'm using React in sort of a minimal way. My idea is to just use it for the state management mainly, and then set up the code so that the D3 rendering logic is decoupled from the React framework, so that if you are using another framework, like Svelte is hugely popular nowadays for data visualization, or Vue, or Angular, or something else that hasn't been invented yet, hopefully the D3 logic is reusable enough where you can just drop it into your project and then just swap out the state management part. Now, in VizHub, there is already a bunch of templates that use React. So here's this React starter. Let me just show you what this looks like first before we change around our circles example to use React. This example also uses an import map to define React, the top level import, and some other things that we need to make React work, namely JSX runtime and React DOM/client. And we only need the JSX runtime if we use JSX, which is a language extension for JavaScript that lets you write what looks like HTML inside of your JavaScript. And it sounds crazy, but turns out it works pretty well. So here in the body, we have this div with an ID of root. And this is where the dynamic React application will be injected. And that happens in this other file, index.jsx. This contains the React boilerplate for getting started with React and JSX. So this is JSX here. It looks like HTML, but it's not. It's just kind of similar. And the way React works is that it returns a React node, I think it's called. So your app gets passed into root.render, and root comes from create root, imported from React DOM/client, where we pass in a reference to our root DOM element, which is defined over here. It's this div. And because it has ID equal root, that's why we can say document.getElementById to get access to that element. And then we say root.render app. And what this app does is it returns a div in JSX with a class of message. See, class is a reserved word, so in React you have to say class name. And then in here it says hello React. So that's it. That's our React starter. So the goal is to take this boilerplate and adapt it to our circles example. And let me try this feature, copy for AI. If I click copy for AI and I paste it, let me just show you what it looks like. It's Markdown that contains all the files. And the idea is that you can copy for AI, then paste that into some AI tool like ChatGPT, and then copy the response and then hit paste for AI to make your code edits. Let's try that out. Might be the fastest way to do this. So first I will fork this example and I'll call it circles with D3 and React. And then I'll open this AI editor and say Please adjust this code so that it starts with the following React boilerplate and change it around so that the SVG is managed by React with useRef. And then the useEffect calls the viz function. And then I'll take that thing where I hit copy for AI, it gets all these files, and I will paste it right in here. And let's see if that works. Oh my gosh, I think it did work. Let's take a look at these files. Oh, this is brilliant. I just love AI. Okay, so we have D3 and the various React imports in our import map. It did revert it to an inline style, but whatever. And then we have index.jsx, and this pulls together the various imports from React and D3 and our data and our viz. And this is exactly right. This is exactly what I was hoping for. So let me break down what's going on here. There's a lot going on. Okay, so we call createRoot with our document.getElementById root. And just to check where that's coming from, this is a div now in HTML. And then we call root.render app. Now this is using JSX. So we have our app React component, which is a function that will return this JSX definition of an SVG element with width and height hard-coded. And then we have ref equals SVG ref. Now, in React, there's this concept of a ref, and this is React's escape hatch that lets you access the DOM directly. And the way this works is you need to call useRef, which gets imported from React. And this is a React hook. React hooks are a thing. They all start with use. And you can call them within these React function components. And there's also another hook called useEffect. And this is a hook that defines a side effect, which is a function that runs after React is done rendering the DOM. And inside of this useEffect, we define a function. And this is the function. This is the side effect function that runs after each render. And then the second argument here is an empty array, which is a degenerate case of this concept of dependencies of this side effect. And when we put things in there later, it will trigger this side effect to rerun anytime those dependencies change, which we'll see in a bit when we add the clicking. But for now, the only thing that our side effect does is uses D3, select, imported from D3, to select the current value of our SVG ref. And with refs, they all have this property called .current because refs can change over time. They're mutable. But anyway, SVG ref.current will be a reference to the DOM node, the actual SVG DOM node that was rendered by React. So long story short, it's a way to get access to an SVG element. And then we can call our viz function, passing in the SVG selection and the data exactly the same as before. And our viz function remains unchanged from what it was before. Okay, that's basically it. That's circles with D3 in React. However, recall that one of the constraints that I wanted to impose on this course is that it should be possible to export the thing out of VizHub and have it run without any build tools. And that's not the case right now because we are using this .jsx. So to wrap up this starting point, which will be the foundation for everything going forward, I want to make sure that it adheres to that constraint. And let's see if the AI editing can do this. Don't use JSX. Oh man, I think that actually worked. Let me look at the diff or show you the diff. I think that's an easier way. to look at this. Okay, so index.js, that was the old one. It got deleted. We have index.jsx, and I'll change that file name. But what it did here is exactly correct. So it changed it from the JSX to the actual vanilla JavaScript equivalent of that JSX. See, what happens when you transpile JSX into regular JavaScript is it actually does this exact transformation internally. That's what build tools do, like Vite or other things. But we don't need necessarily to actually use JSX to use React. We can use React.createElement instead. And it creates an SVG element with ref this and width and height as an object. This is what JSX transpiles to under the hood. And then the same thing with this app JSX. It just calls React.createElement, passing in our app. And then I'll just go in and do some manual edits here to change it from .jsx to just .js. And I'll change that over here as well. And I'm pretty sure we don't need this JSX runtime anymore. Although, let me see, how does it import? Okay, it's just react.createElement. So I think actually we could just import createElement like this from React, and then we don't need the React dot. And I think that should still work. Yeah, looks good. Okay, great. So now let me just show you how this is truly standalone, and you can run this locally and develop locally without any build tools. If you click export to zip, you'll get a file, a zip file, where if you unzip it, you can see these viz files here. And then if you just double click index.html, it should run. Let's see why it's not. Oh, cores. Yeah, so you do need a local HTTP server. I mean, in any case, to develop locally, you need a local server. So let me just quickly show you how to do that. I'm in Linux here. This is a terminal. I have already HTTP-server installed through Node. And then if I just start that up and go here, it runs. Hooray! No build tools. It uses React. This is what I'm going for. Okay, that's all for the React setup. Next, we're going to add the clicking and explore this concept of unidirectional data flow.